Imagine a world where knowledge is not a boundless ocean, but a tiny, precious lake accessible to only a few. A world where every letter was painstakingly written by hand, every page was a work of art, and every book cost a fortune. This was a world where sages passed down their wisdom in whispers, and the history of civilization was as fragile as human memory. This was our world for thousands of years. We live in an age where information is at our fingertips. Thousands of books are instantly available. Libraries offer millions of volumes, and education seems like a universal right. But the path to this reality was incredibly long, difficult, and filled with amazing stories of passion for knowledge, sacrifice, and ingenious inventions that changed humanity forever. Today, we will journey through the centuries to trace how people learned, how schools, universities, and libraries evolved, and of course, how books, once copied by monks in the silence of their cells, became available to anyone with a thirst to read. In the earliest times, when humanity was just learning to speak and communicate, knowledge was passed down exclusively by word of mouth. Stories, myths, and practical survival skills were all transmitted from elders to the young through oral traditions. Teachers were the elders, hunters, and shamans, those who possessed life experience and wisdom. This was an era when human memory was the sole repository of information, and its distortion or loss meant the disappearance of invaluable lessons. The absence of writing made knowledge fragile, dependent on human life and the accuracy of reproduction. Entire cultures could vanish with their last living storytellers. The true revolution in education and knowledge preservation began with the advent of writing. The earliest forms of writing, cave paintings, pictograms, and later more complex systems like cuneiform in Mesopotamia, approximately 3500 to 3000 BCE, and hieroglyphs in Egypt, around 3200 BCE, allowed information to be recorded outside of human memory. This was a monumental leap. Knowledge could now be stored, passed down through generations without distortion, and spread over great distances. With the emergence of writing came the need to teach it. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, the first schools appeared attached to temples and palaces. In these schools, accessible mainly to boys from noble and wealthy families, scribes learned complex writing systems, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and law. Students sat on mats, painstakingly carving symbols onto clay tablets or papyrus. The training was strict, and discipline was maintained with corporal punishment, as ancient texts attest. The goal was to prepare an elite capable of governing the state, keeping records, documenting history, and performing religious rites. In ancient Greece, education took on a different meaning. Here, the focus shifted from practical training to the development of a harmonious personality and an ideal citizen. In Athens, for example, girls were educated at home, attended and gymnasia from the age of 7, where they were taught not only literacy, rhetoric, and philosophy, but also physical development and music. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the great philosophers, founded their own schools, where they developed critical thinking through dialogue and reasoned debate. Books, as we know them, did not exist then. There were papyrus scrolls written by hand, and they were very rare. Often, teachers read aloud, and students memorized what they heard. In ancient Rome, education largely followed Greek models, but with an emphasis on law, oratory, and military matters. Children of noble Romans began with homeschooling and then attended state schools, where they studied Latin, Greek, history, literature, and rhetoric. In Rome, as in Greece, the first libraries appeared, which were collections of papyrus scrolls. They were either private, for wealthy patricians, or public, open to a select few. Knowledge was power, and access to books was a privilege. Throughout antiquity, the primary medium for text was the papyrus scroll. The process of creating them was laborious, Sheets of papyrus were glued together, the text was written in a single column, and the scroll had to be unrolled to be read. The appearance of parchment, treated animal skin, was a significant step forward. Parchment was more durable than papyrus, could be written on both sides, and could be folded. This gave rise to the codex, the ancestor of the modern book, where sheets were bound along one side. The codex was far more convenient than the scroll. It was easy to flip through, find specific passages, and was more compact. This innovation, which emerged in the first centuries CE, greatly facilitated access to texts and their storage. With the fall of the Roman Empire and the dawn of the Middle Ages in Europe, much of the ancient knowledge was lost. The centers of education and book preservation became the monasteries. In the silence of monastic scriptori, special workshops for copying books, monk scribes, using parchment and goose quills, manually copied Bibles, theological treatises, and, to a lesser extent, the works of ancient authors. This was a meticulous, slow, and incredibly laborious task that forms the core of our story today. The life of a monk scribe was austere and monotonous. In the scriptoria, which were often unheated and poorly lit, an atmosphere of absolute silence reigned, broken only by the scratching of a quill on parchment. The workday began at dawn and ended at dusk to conserve expensive candles. Monks worked hunched over sloping desks for hours on end, often developing back problems, neck pain, and eye strain. Medieval chronicles contain notes in which monks complain about fatigue, cold, and the difficulties of copying. Some left personal remarks in the margins of manuscripts, like, "Thank God I finished," or "My hand hurts, the light is dim, but I continue." The process of creating a single book was complex and consisted of several stages. First, the treated skin of calves, sheep, or goats had to be prepared. This was a labor-intensive and costly material. The skin was carefully cleaned, stretched on frames, scraped, and bleached. The parchment sheets were then flattened and ruled, and only then did the writing begin. Next, the scribe came into play. He used a goose quill, which had to be constantly sharpened, and ink made from soot, oak galls, or other vegetable dyes. Each letter was formed with incredible precision, often in a cursive script to save precious space. Any error was a catastrophe. It was extremely difficult to correct. Mistakes were erased with pumice stone, and a patch was often placed over the defect. Sometimes, monk artists were brought in to decorate the manuscripts with intricate miniatures and initials, the first letters of chapters. They used precious pigments, often with gold and silver, to create stunningly beautiful images. These books were genuine works of art, and their cost was astronomical. A single Bible could be worth as much as an entire village. This is why books were so highly valued. Libraries at the time existed primarily in monasteries and cathedrals. Access to them was strictly limited, and books were often chained to shelves to prevent theft, as they were so incredibly valuable. Knowledge was the domain of a select few, the clergy and some of the nobility. For the vast majority of the population, the world was illiterate and ignorant. Meanwhile, in the East, the Islamic world was experiencing its golden age. The Arab caliphates actively collected, translated, and studied the works of ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian scholars. Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo became global centers of science and education. The first public libraries appeared here, which were significantly larger than those in Europe. The most famous example was the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a massive research center, library, and translation academy. The Islamic world significantly improved the bookmaking process. Paper, which had come from China via Samarkand in the 8th century, was widely used. Paper was much cheaper and easier to produce than parchment. This led to the mass production of books, which in turn stimulated the development of education. Libraries were established, containing hundreds of thousands of volumes on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and literature. Universities, such as Al-Azhar in Cairo or Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, attracted students from all over the world, offering systematic education. Knowledge from the Islamic world gradually penetrated Europe through Spain and Sicily, stimulating the first stirrings of the European Renaissance. By the 11th or 12th centuries, a revival began in Europe. Growing cities, the development of trade, and the need for educated lawyers, doctors, and theologians led to the emergence of the first universities. The University of Bologna, founded c. 1088, the University of Paris, c. 1150, and the University of Oxford, c. 1167, arose as corporations of students and teachers. Instruction was in Latin, and the main discipline was theology, but law, medicine, and the liberal arts, grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music, were also studied. Teaching methods remained traditional: lectures, reading aloud, and disputations. Students took notes on what they heard, creating their own copies of texts, which was laborious and often led to errors. Books were still extremely expensive and rare. University libraries grew, but their collections were modest compared to their Eastern counterparts. Access to books remained a problem. Scribes worked not only in monasteries, but also in city workshops, fulfilling orders for universities and wealthy clients. There was often a system in which the university owned an exemplaria, an approved copy of a text that students or hired scribes could borrow to copy in parts. This was a slow and inefficient process that severely hindered the spread of knowledge. The culmination of this long journey occurred in the mid-15th century. Humanity had accumulated enough knowledge and technology to take the next incredible step. At this time, a huge demand for books was brewing in Europe. Universities were expanding, literacy was slowly but surely increasing. Trade and travel required more information, and the Reformation needed to disseminate religious texts. The existing system of manual copying could not meet this growing demand. Books remained a luxury, and knowledge a privilege. Then, a man whose name would forever change the world stepped onto the stage: Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz, Germany. He was not the first to experiment with printing. China had long used woodblock printing and even movable type, but their system of ideograms made it inefficient. But it was Gutenberg who made the breakthrough. Between 1440 and 1450, he developed and perfected a comprehensive system that became the catalyst for the information revolution. It was a fusion of several key innovations. First, he created movable type, casting individual metal letters and punctuation marks that could be reused and rearranged in any order. This was far more efficient than carving entire pages, as in woodblock printing. Gutenberg developed a unique alloy of lead, tin, and antimony that was strong enough for printing but easy to melt. He also invented the printing press itself, a modified wine press that allowed him to apply pressure evenly, transferring ink from the type to the paper. This was much more effective than manual rubbing. To make it all work, he developed a special oil-based ink that adhered well to the metal type and dried quickly on paper without smudging or spreading. And critically, his invention was made possible by the widespread availability of paper, which had spread from the Arab world into Europe, providing a cheap and abundant material for printing. The result of this combination was the famous Gutenberg Bible, completed around 1455. It was the first major book printed with movable type in Europe. Its quality was astonishing. It looked like a manuscript but was printed much faster and more accurately. The creation of the Gutenberg Bible was a turning point in human history. The invention of printing with movable type was like an explosion. Within a few decades, printing presses spread across all of Europe. While only about 2,000 books were copied by hand in the entire 12th century, more than 20 million books were printed in the first 50 years after Gutenberg. The cost of books plummeted, and their availability grew exponentially. The consequences were stunning. For one, cheap books encouraged learning to read and write among the general population, which led to a widespread increase in literacy. The first textbooks and books written in simple language, accessible to new readers, began to appear. In addition, scientists could now quickly and accurately publish their discoveries, share them with colleagues, and receive feedback, accelerating scientific progress by 100-fold. The errors that accumulated during manual copying disappeared, and knowledge became more precise and standardized. The printing press also played a crucial role in the Reformation, as Martin Luther actively used it to spread his ideas and translations of the Bible into vernacular languages. This allowed him to quickly disseminate his theses and pamphlets throughout Germany, which became a powerful catalyst for the Reformation and changed the religious map of Europe. Furthermore, the ideas of the Enlightenment, liberty, and equality were all made possible by mass printing. People became more informed and capable of forming their own opinions, which contributed to the development of democracy and civil liberties. Finally, printing helped to develop national languages and standardize spelling and grammar, as the same texts were distributed over large territories. This, in turn, contributed to the formation of a national identity. Libraries began to transform from repositories of rare manuscripts into vast collections of printed books, open to a wider public. Universities gained access to a huge volume of new information, which fostered the development of new disciplines and teaching methods. Education began to move away from exclusively oral lectures and transitioned to the study of printed textbooks. In the 17th and 18th centuries, during the Enlightenment, the idea that education should be available to everyone began to gain traction. The first state schools appeared, although widespread compulsory education was still a distant prospect. Books and textbooks became increasingly diverse and affordable. In the 19th century, with the rise of industrial society, the need for an educated workforce and citizenry became obvious. The widespread introduction of compulsory primary education, the construction of thousands of schools, and the creation of public libraries were all direct consequences of the printing revolution. By the 20th century, books had become an integral part of daily life. Technological developments, rotary printing presses, the linotype machine, offset printing, made book production even faster and cheaper. Mass publishing houses emerged, producing millions of copies annually. Libraries were transformed into huge cultural and educational centers, offering not only books, but also access to information in a variety of formats. Education became accessible to millions, opening doors to new professions and opportunities. Today, we stand on the threshold of a new revolution, comparable in scale to Gutenberg's invention, the digital one. E-books, online libraries, and access to scientific articles and educational courses worldwide via the Internet. Information has become even more accessible, instantaneous, and comprehensive. This presents new challenges and opportunities. How do we learn in a world where knowledge is infinite? How do we distinguish credible information from false information? How do we preserve the value of deep reading in an age of short messages? From cave paintings to e-ink, from the whisper of an ancient storyteller to online lectures available to millions, the history of education and the book is inseparable from the history of humanity. It is a journey from exclusive knowledge to its democratization, from slow, laborious copying to instantaneous dissemination. The book, in all its forms, remains the foundation of civilization, a bridge between generations, and a window into the limitless world of ideas. And every time we open a new book, we are touching this incredible story, the story of humanity's quest for knowledge that changes the world forever.